Hello and welcome to Pickles Garage. Today we're going to be working on the front bumper of my 1979 GMC C3500 pickup here. The bumper is in okay shape. It's in pretty decent shape. You can buy these online for like 200 bucks or so, but I do kind of like that it looks worn just because the rest of the truck is naturally pretty worn as well. So I'm going to freshen it up. It is pretty rusty on the other side, just like surface rust. So I'm going to show you how to remove that properly, as well as trying to salvage the bolts that we have here. You can buy these pretty easily online, the bolts, pretty cheaply as well, but they're almost always chromed, and that's pretty hard to paint for the first time unless you either remove the chrome or scuff it up pretty well. So I'm going to try and keep these just because they have a layer of paint on them, and I'm going to show you kind of how to salvage them. But let's go ahead and dive right into it. So looking at this from the underside here, this is the passenger side. You'll see this one looks pretty decent. I'm not too concerned about getting that off, but some of these other ones are looking a little bit rusted, especially like the threads. So you'll see those look pretty beat. I'm also going to look into painting these supports here. Again, you can also buy those online pretty easily, but this is about salvaging as much as we can. And then you'll see that surface rust on the inside of the bumper. I'm hoping most of that will just kind of wash out pretty easily, but I'm going to show you what I'll use to remove it. This side's probably the worst, but we'll start off with the bolts. I am missing one here, and the bumper is pretty bent. I'm probably just going to leave that off as well, but just so you know. But that one looks pretty decent too. So let me show you how I'm going to clean up these bolts for removal. Alright, so I washed it just because I had some smudges and I am going to be painting it, so I figured it'd be easier to wash it while it's on it than when it's off. So what I was talking about here, this rust dissolver, this gel type, is incredible. I use this all the time, and I've used it on tons of different vehicles for different stuff, and I still feel like I have tons of it. And I spray a ton. So as you can see, it's broken, it's well used, but this stuff is fantastic. It's great for really a lot of different stuff, as far as like getting bolts off if you have like an old bolt, just to clean up the threads before you try and take a nut through it. It's great on like surface rust. It essentially removes it entirely. It just dissolves it. So the name states, but it's great for sort of that introductory thing, just to clean it up. All you have to do is kind of wet whatever you're about to spray, like any of the rust that you're about to spray on it, and then you go ahead and spray this on, let it sit for 10 to 30 minutes depending on how severe it is, and then you just kind of wash it / wipe it off, and it's good to go. So I'll show you on something like random as well, but I'll show you on the bolts. The bolts are going to be a little harder to see the difference just because they're pretty well rusted, but I'll show you on some like surface rust on the bumper, just to show how good this stuff is. So like I said, I'm going to go ahead and spray these on the inside, but just so that you have a better visual here of what it's doing. You can see this other side of the bolt here, pretty well rusted, and I wet it down a little bit. I'm just going to spray it like that, and then I'm just going to let it sit. So we'll come back to it in about 15-30 minutes, and I'll show you what this stuff does. Alright, so it's been about 30 minutes, and I'll just wipe it off real quick. And I'm gonna wash it as well, put some water down on it, but look at that. Insane. Stuff works very well. So it's going to do wonder for the bolts on the inside, cleaning the threads and whatnot, but you'll see all that surface rust is gone, which is going to make it really easy to get the threads off. So let's go ahead and check underneath and start pulling them. Alright, so it looks like I am going to have to buy some bolts. So this was the super rusty side, so I didn't have a whole lot of faith in it. Luckily, it just kind of snapped off fairly easily, so I didn't have to spend too much time with it. But it's just fused. It was never going to go anywhere. The bolt was weak anyways, so onward and upward there. Didn't really get a whole lot of traction on the impact, so if you run into a situation like that, you can just use, this is size 19, I have a breaker bar, and then I have an extra pipe just to give me more leverage. But like I said, it snapped off. I'm not too concerned because the other side is just a square peg, so I'm going to punch it out once once we get the rest of the bumper. So I wanted to start with the worst possible bolt, so hopefully I'll have better luck with the rest of them. So I'm gonna go ahead and switch on over to these, which look a lot better now that they've been cleaned up. And then we'll go from there. So naturally, as you're taking off bolts, you're going to want something to keep the bumper from falling on you. So I'm just doing the outsides right now, and then I'm gonna have a couple chairs. I'll show you my setup when I do it, but just be careful, obviously. These outside ones are important, but the middle ones I'm gonna do last, so I have a little bit more stability here. Just one of those days, I guess. But like I said, on the other side, basically once it breaks off at the nut, this is just a square that goes in there, just kind of holds it in place. So we'll go ahead and replace all these bad bolts anyways, and we'll keep going. But now that we have the end pieces off, I will go ahead and show you the support I'm going to do to make sure this doesn't fall on my face. Alright, so if you have some extra hands, obviously that's preferred. I'm probably going to put a jack right in the center with maybe some ratchet straps just to kind of hold it, but these are just basically an emergency catch. All else fails, I'd rather trust some plastic lawn furniture rather than my kneecaps or something. So I'm going to go ahead and do the rest of the bolts here, and then we're going to safely lower it, and we'll start on the prep for paint. Alright, so naturally these are a little bit tight. I did break them loose just because I think I'm actually going to replace this bracket as well, seeing as I have to get some new bolts anyways, and usually the kits come with these. So I broke these loose just so it's easier to get them off when the bumper itself is off, but I'm going to go ahead and attack these two bolts right here, and those are holding that bracket, and then the bumper should be free. Alright, so we got it off. So that one was actually loose, so that's good that I'm redoing this anyways. So I'm going to go ahead and be able to tighten that bolt, and then that way there won't be so much vibration, but it looks pretty good. Just that surface rust that I was talking about, I'm going to use a similar rust dissolver just to get as much of it as I can off, but I'm not too concerned. It doesn't look too bad. But then I'm going to go ahead and spray paint it with a rust covering, Rust-Oleum, and that will allow the, it'll stop sort of any spread of rust here. But I'll clean this up, and then I'm going to do more of a high gloss on the exterior. But we'll go ahead and start diving into prepping this. Alright, so I got the rust dissolver all on the back here. I just wetted it down and then squirted it on, but you can already see some green here, which I wasn't really seeing before. So it's definitely already working. It's only been on there a short time, so I'm just going to let it sit for about 30 minutes, and then I'll rinse it down, and then we'll go ahead and start prepping it for paint here. I'm just going to sand it, and then we'll go from there. Alright, so now that it's been soaking for a little while, we can actually see some of the original color come back, that green that was on the inside of this bumper here. I also soaked these for a while in some of that solution I was talking about too, and so now we're just going to go ahead and sand it for prep here. So what we have here is we have this is the 120, so 120 is good for just finishing, 120 or higher. For just kind of getting a good paintable surface. You're not going to be removing a whole lot, but it is going to kind of level out any minor imperfections. And then we have 60 here, which the lower number is going to be a lot coarser. So I'm going to use that for some of these parts that still have some rust hanging on, just surface stuff. And I'm going to go ahead and use this. So it'll make the job a little easier, but once we're finished with that, we're going to go ahead and start painting. Alright, still drying a bit, but I'm happy to start painting. I'm going to go ahead and use this Rust-Oleum, just a black, basically spray it on. So if you wanted to do another layer on top of this with more of a gloss, you can, but I'm just going to do this on the inside just to cover some of that surface rust that's still there. And then I have a different one for the outside that's actually going to be visible, but I'm going to go ahead and start spraying this on. I'm going to do probably about 3 layers. Just so it's nice and thick and it stays, and then we'll go ahead and flip it over, sand a little bit, and work on the next side. So having a tool like this definitely helps. I'm starting mostly with like a 60 to 80 grit just for different parts. 120 is going to be more for the white paint that I'm not trying to get rid of, but some of these deeper grooves like this, I just want to make sure that I have a smooth surface. So it's kind of a scratch that's actually into the metal, but hopefully a few layers of paint that will actually cover that now that it's more level. But essentially you'll see I'm not trying to go to the metal for everything, but some of those deeper grooves I'm just hitting with the 60 to 80 grit and just making sure it's smooth. So if you go over to this side, which I haven't touched yet, you'll see all these divots just from rocks hitting it over the years. And if I was to paint over this again, then my new paint would have similar divots. So just giving the best opportunity for it to have that level surface and getting rid of any like surface rust like this. And this tool just makes it a lot faster. So I'm gonna keep wrapping up. Definitely with this stuff, you'll see all this is like super fine powdery. You're gonna wanna wear a mask if you can. Just whatever you're wearing when you paint should be sufficient, but you don't wanna breathe too much of this in. Certain years we're still using lead paint depending on how old your vehicle is. So any opportunity to keep that out of your lungs is definitely preferred. But I'm gonna go ahead and wrap this up and then we'll start painting on this side. So I'm going to be using the semi-gloss protective enamel. I'm hoping it looks a little bit like my bumper when it's clean. And then I also have this grip. It saves your finger because just pressing for a long time, you'll be surprised. It does definitely hurt if you're doing something like I did my bed, which again is dirty. But this thing was a lifesaver, so definitely recommend it. And now the first of many. Alright, so you're going to start with a light layer, so you're still going to be able to see some of the color underneath. You're going to see some of the texture as well, if you look closely. So always start with sort of the light layer, don't hold, just kind of do a sweeping motion, just on, off, that sort of thing. Don't hold it and spray it, so you don't want a thick layer for the first one. This is just getting a good solid base that can stick to whatever layer was there originally. And we're just gonna give that plenty of time to dry, and then once it's dry, then we'll do a next layer, which some people will do a medium. So you just do a little bit more filling in the gaps, a little bit thicker coat, and then the third layer or even fourth layer, that's when you start doing more of the heavy coat. I'm probably gonna do 3 on this, maybe 4. We'll just see how it looks after the third. But 3 is usually pretty good. But just because this is gonna be the front of the vehicle, I want there to be plenty of material there. So this is what it looks like so far. Like I said, just a quick covering. You're still going to see some white spots. Still going to see some of that texture underneath, but hopefully the next few layers will start smoothing it out. Alright, and here you go. So I went with 4 layers of paint. Basically any sort of imperfections that were happening during the painting process, like say there's a rise, say you spray and you accidentally pause too long, you can sand it and then just kind of repaint, and that'll give you more of that smooth finish. But if you remember all the dimples and everything, not really anything left there, so all clear. Now I'm just painting the brace that you see on either side and then the hangers for those middle bits, and then I'm going to go ahead and start reassembling, and then you're going to see the finished product here soon. So starting to reattach some of the brackets here. You'll notice that if you buy some more bolts, it'll come with a washer and a lock washer. Make sure you use them. Obviously it just helps getting it as tight as possible and staying there. I also am replacing my other bolts, the ones that were connected here, as well as the ones that were connecting the bracket to the frame. I'm using grade 8 bolts. Grade 5 is probably plenty, but I usually like to overkill it anyways, and my kind of logic behind that is I'd rather the bolts don't break on something like a bumper if it's preventing further damage. So these will be more than enough, but like I said, you could probably get away with grade 5 stainless. But I'm going to go ahead and pop these on, and then you'll see the finished product here shortly. And here we go, finished product. So everything went on nice and smoothly. Best thing to do is to try and keep the bolts that go into the bracket a little loose. You want it tight, but only just loose enough just for them to barely rotate. And so that way you can line it up as you put it on. But then you want it barely tight because it is kind of confined to try and get in there and do the finish tightening. So you don't want to have them completely loose and then have to do the entire thing from start to finish. But I got it all lined up. My bumper was a little bent, so I did have some help just kind of pulling it as I was lining things up, but it looks good. Pretty happy with it. You'll notice I didn't paint these bits. I had mentioned earlier that I was going to try and avoid that and paint it, but I actually kind of like the look of it just because I was thinking I am going to be painting the rims as well, and so those will be black, but then I'm going to get new lug nuts which will be chrome, and so I feel like that'll match a little better than if I had just painted it. But if you were to attempt it, what you have to do is you really have to scuff these up quite a bit, and then that will allow for there to be paint. A lot of this chrome is usually kind of cheap, so you can get chrome removers and just kind of wipe it off and then paint it from there. But like I said, it can be a little funky, but free to do however you want it. But that is my restoration here. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.